Our message today is trusting God more than myself. And I don't know about you, but I am one of those people that sort of like being self-reliant. I like it when I can do it myself. And I think it's not a bad trait to be independent and self-reliant, but it can become a bad trait when I put more faith in myself than in God. And I will suggest to you that in many times in our lives, we find ourselves in just that predicament, trusting ourselves more than we trust God. The book of Judges is just such a time. In fact, in chapter 21, the book of Judges says, "In those days there were no kings in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And I think it isn't much of a stretch for you to look around today and say, are we living in a world where everyone does what is right in their own eyes? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. We all make our own calls. We all become our own independent gods. And unfortunately, when we do that, it leads to bad places. Israel, during the time of Judges, spent almost the entire book of Judges going from one extreme to another. They would reject God and do evil. God would punish them by letting another nation invade them. And then when they were subjected, they'd cry out to God for deliverance. And the very moment that they were delivered, they'd start rejecting God again. A foolish people, to be sure. But unfortunately, I resemble them a little too much to judge them too harshly, because I too have fallen into that category. Our first scripture today is Judges 6, 1 through 6. And it says, "The people of Israel did what is evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of the Midian for 7 years. And the hand of the Midian overpowered Israel, and because Midian people of Israel made themselves the dens, they were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. And they would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, leaving no sustenance in Israel, no sheep, no ox, no donkey. For they would come up for their livestock and their tents, and they would come up like locusts in numbers. Both they and their camels could not be counted. So they laid waste to the land as they came in, and Israel was brought low because of Midian. And the people of Israel cried out for help for the Lord." Like I said, morning, Judy.
Good morning. I discovered April Fool's Day a little early.
Yeah.
God has a sense of humor. I tell you. I reminded everybody else, set your clocks ahead. Except me.
Yeah, it happens.
Thanks for your understanding.
Not a problem. I think we've all been there. At least I know I have. But the thing about it is, when people do what is right in their own eyes, they usually do evil. I think it's a sad truth, but when you give mankind free rein to do whatever he wants, he will go the route of doing wrong. It's just our nature. And when I have this attitude that no one can tell me what to do, it's my life, and no one else gets to tell me what rules I have in it, that attitude will always lead you away from God and into evil. Now, make no mistake, God allows for free choice. And I often have heard people say, it would be a whole lot simpler if God hadn't given us free choice. If I couldn't choose to do evil, my life would get a lot simpler, which is true, it would. But God so loved the world that he did not want people who were ordered and were refused the ability to choose him over their worldly passions. God wanted you to love him and to serve him because you loved him. So he gave you free will. That free will expands to the point of saying, I can also choose to reject God. But that does not mean that God will bless that rejection. And as we see in Judges, the people of Israel were going down a bad road, not following God, and God says, okay, you don't want me in your life, maybe you'd like the Midians. Well, it doesn't take people long to figure out the Midians are a whole lot worse than God, and they start praying to God again. So the book of Judges is always this bouncing from one extreme to the other. I want to do it my way. Wait a minute, my way just led me into a terrible situation. God, get me out of this terrible situation that my choices have brought. And Lord, deliver us, please. And God would deliver them. And then, ironically, within just a few chapters, you're seeing they're doing back to the same thing. So here they are being abused. They're in a point where everything they grow has been taken away from them. They're being punished by a foreign nation. And we get to Judges 6, verses 11 through 16. And this is where it gets to be fun. Because when people tell you there is no sarcasm in the Bible, I'm going, you haven't read the Bible, have you? We're seeing a very sarcastic set of verses here. It says, now the angel of the Lord came and set the terebinth by Ophrah, and I'll never pronounce it, I always want to pronounce it Ophrah. Ophrah is the correct way, I always want to pronounce it Oprah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, who was the son of Gideon, was beating out wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midians. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has this all happened to us? And where are his wonderful deeds our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Did I not send you? And he says, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. Now, what Gideon is doing is he's winnowing wheat. And I don't know how many are familiar with winnowing wheat, but when you harvest the wheat, you get the stem and the chaff and everything together with the wheat, and you take it to a place where there's a flat spot, and you put a tarp down or you get some clean ground, and you put that out there in the ground, and you take a winnowing fork, and you toss the wheat and all this in the air. And there's usually a slight breeze, and what will happen is the stems and the chaff will blow off, and what will fall to the tarp will be just the wheat. Now you understand the principle. Here is Gideon winnowing wheat inside of a vat. Sort of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? And here is an angel of God saying, hey, mighty man of valor. And Gideon's like, yeah, right, I'm hiding in a vat just so somebody doesn't steal my wheat. How mighty am I? The sarcasm is definitely deep in that verse. But it is also not just sarcasm. It's a profession of God about what Gideon can become. It is in God's intention that Gideon will become a great general and that he will lead his people against the Midianites and he will defeat them. Now, I don't know about you, but when my country is invaded by a people so numerous that they're compared to locusts, and I don't know how many of you have seen videos of locusts on the ground, but they can literally turn the sky black and the ground black because they're just billions and billions of these things. And that's what the Midianites were like in Israel. And here's a little bitty guy named Gideon who's going to lead a general and become the army that defeats them. I think Gideon had to balk a little bit. In fact, if you read on in Judges, we see Gideon doing a lot of balking. He says, I want to be sure about this, God. He puts out fleeces. He asks God. He prays about it, and he prays a lot about it because he's like, I don't know. But finally, God makes it very clear to him that yes, you are the man I've called, and yes, you are going to raise an army, and you are going to defeat the Midianites. So Gideon calls around to the neighboring people who are also fed up with Midianites and says, who will come and fight? And guess what? 33,000 men show up. That's a sizable army, but it's just a little bit too big for God. So God gives them instructions. You have too many men. You need to get rid of them. And at that point, I'm sure Gideon went to God and went, are you nuts? Are you crazy? And we're going to read that scripture now. In Judges 7, 1 through 9. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them, by the hill of Morsh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites in your hands, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand saved me. Now therefore proclaim to the ears of the people, so whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 people returned, and 10,000 remained. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And anyone whom I say to you, this is the one shall go with you. And the ones will go with you. And anyone whom I say to you, this is one that shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the people to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps shall be set free to himself, set him by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink, that number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the men knelt and drank water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your army. Let the others go every man to his own home. So he took the provisions in their hands and their trumpets, and they sent the rest of Israel and every man to his tent, but retained the 300 men. And the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. And that same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands. God is very clear that when the dust settles from this battle, no one's going to be able to say, look what I did. Now, I don't know about you, but I've caught myself more than once in this exact same situation. Lord, deliver me. I'm in trouble. I need help. And the Lord delivers me, and the next thing you know, I'm saying, wow, I used some pretty good judgment when I did this and this and this. Suddenly, it's not God's victory, it's my victory. And God knew that, and he said it's going to happen that way unless it is very, very obvious to you that you did not do it. And I think, unfortunately, it's our human nature to want to be self-reliant, to want to be able to do it ourselves, that brings this attitude into play that God has to battle. And I had a beautiful example of just exactly this kind of situation as a board of director of Wings of Refuge. I'm in my 9th year now, and early on, about a year or two into the ministry, we had an October board meeting, and the meeting was pretty grim. The funds were not there. In fact, we had just about enough funds to make it to January, just 3 months away. And we looked at the money, and we looked at the budget, and we're going, the money doesn't lie. We can only go to January. And at that point, we're going to have to shut this ministry down. And we no, this is not right. This is not, God has brought this too far for this to be where we need to go. And we really struggled with it, and we prayed. And believe me, we prayed. So as we prayed, God answered our prayer. And God didn't say, here's a fundraiser I want you to do, and this will bring in the money. No, what he said is, you're renting a home in Iowa Falls, a pretty cheap place to rent a home, and we were getting a discount, by the way. We weren't even paying full rate on the rental. God says, so I want you to do away with the rental home, and I want you to buy a home in Ames. And I'm like, God, I don't know if you understand finances, but we're not making the bills renting. You want us to go to the most expensive town in central Iowa and buy a home? Maybe I need to explain finances to you, God, because that just doesn't make sense. Just like it didn't make sense for Gideon to tell 2/3 of his army to go home. You don't go into battle sending 2/3 of your army home. But we prayed about it, and we felt God was saying, that's what I want you to do, so we did it. And we were in the process of raising funds, and we hadn't even gotten that house a quarter of the way finished. And another agency come up and says, hey, we've got a house we want to give you. After we'd purchased the other house, by the way. But this one has been burnt to a crisp. And I toured it, and I looked through it, and I says, it's bulldoze time. There's nothing left of this house. It's just too far gone. And we prayed and said, okay, God, this is it. We probably bulldoze this property, use that property to pay for the revisions of the house we just purchased. Thank you, God. God says, no, that's not what I have in mind. I want you to rebuild that house as well. And again, I'm looking at, and here I am a pastor. I preach faith. I preach trust in God. I preach, and inside of me, I'm going, God, what part of this don't you understand? Because, by the way, at this moment in time, we were in COVID lockdown. There were no fundraisers. There was no way to raise money. And we just like, no, there's no way. Well, just like Gideon, who went out with 300 men who didn't even have a weapon. They carried torches and pots, and they carried trumpets. And they stood on a hill. They uncovered their torches and they blasted their trumpets, and God sent the Midianites into a craze, and they killed each other. God did everything. They did nothing. With Wings of Refuge, we were in Ames. We had churches that had already committed to help us with the first house, and those same churches said, hey, we want to help with the second house. We had a ministry called Go Serve Global out of Northwest Iowa. This is, we want to come in and gut that house for you. Like I said, I told you that it was worth nothing. It looked bulldozable to me. It was the most trashed house I'd ever seen in a fire. But the structure was still there. Long story short, volunteers during COVID came together and put that house together. Women from churches came in and adopted rooms in that house. It says, I not only want to pay for all the furnishings, I want to decorate it, and I want to pray for the people who are going to be living here. And they did. At the end of the day, when I toured that home finished, it's the most beautiful home I've ever been in. It is the most beautiful house. I've seen the better homes and garden stuff. This is far superior to it. These little ladies from churches in Ames and around the area poured their hearts into this house. And they built these 2 houses with almost no assistance from us. The fundraising that we did didn't pay for hardly any of it. It was donated. Donated labor, donated parts. So that when it got done, just like Gideon, I can't sit here and go, the board was pretty smart in how we handled that situation. We did really good. No, we prayed and we trusted God, which is the only thing we did right, but that's a good thing. God did the rest. He did the victory. And I'm here to tell you that when you see that kind of miracle take place, it changes you. When we were told to get something that we couldn't afford and invest in it and step out in faith, I have no doubt I felt just like Gideon did that day when he sent all of his army home, except for 300 men. It's like, this is not right, God. This is not the way it's going to be. But I'm here to tell you, it is in those moments that God can and does some of his most miraculous work. When you see the story of Gideon and how 300 men caused the Midianites to literally destroy themselves, When you look at the Wings of Refuge ministry that 8 years ago was bankrupt, we were going under. There is no two ways about it, my friends. We were not going to make it. And God says, not only are you going to make it, you're going to have 2 almost brand new homes by the time I'm done. I'm here to tell you, watching God do that will make you excited. You will get not only excited, you will get humbled. I saw God do the impossible. He took a home that was burnt to a crisp and made it into the most beautiful home I've ever seen. And what I love about that is we are Wings of Refuge all about taking women who the world says has no value. They're worthless. It's time to bulldoze them. They've lost any value that they have in the world. And instead of throwing them away, we show them God's love and tell them that God loves them and wants them to be a daughter of the King. That home is a beautiful metaphor for what God is doing at Wings of Refuge. He is taking broken things and making them whole. With Gideon, he took 300 men with torches and trumpets and defeated an army that was so numerous they can't even tell you how many was in it. But I will say that it had to have been in the hundreds of thousands, just from what I've read. They didn't have to strike a single sword blow. They stood on the hill with their torches and they blew their trumpets. And God brought justice to the Midianites by sending them into a craze thinking they were being attacked. And they killed each other. What I am here to tell you today is God can and does still do miracles. I've witnessed them. I've watched God work through the lives of women that were broken and lost and made them whole. I have watched God do things that defy human logic and human mathematics. If you're facing something that is overwhelming and there seems to be no hope, your first step must be prayer. Seek God's guidance. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes it's more than one prayer. Because as we were in Owl Falls praying about that deficit budget that we had, there was no question in my minds that the books don't lie. You know, we got Freeman as our financial secretary, and he balances the books, and he brings it to the council, and he says, here's what the money is, and here's what we can afford, and here's what we can't afford. And to look at those books and say, you know what, the books don't lie, we're done in 3 months. Then to go to God and say, are we done in 3 months, God? And he said, no, not at all. In fact, this will be the turning point for this ministry. We went from not being able to afford a low rent, and I do mean low because we were getting a discount because the man knew the ministry we were doing. And so he was giving us the rent in that house in Owl Falls for a very low price. And you know what? We went from there to affording 2 houses. I was just at a Wings board meeting last week, and the budget scared the living daylights out of me. We are now in over 6-figure, we're in 7-figure status for the budget. And we're meeting that budget. I don't know how, because like I said, same organization, same management, so pretty much, who wasn't making it, and now God is blessing that ministry. And you know what? He's not only blessing it, we're looking at saying, now what do we need to do next? What's the next step? Where are we going after this? And I'll be honest with you, that partly terrifies me, but it partly excites me. After seeing what God has done just with our move to Ames, I go, what is the next 10 years going to look like for that organization? If we continue to trust God like Gideon trusted God, what will God do in that ministry? And my friends, I think if I see it correctly, God is going to do some very amazing things. Now, will it be scary? Yes. I have no doubt as those men crept up on the top of that mountain to overlook the Midianite army with 300 men to face over 100,000 men. And all they have is a trumpet and a torch. There had to be in those 300 men going, this doesn't seem like a very smart idea. We're going to blast trumpets and let them know where we're at, and this 100,000 army is going to come up and just obliterate us. Logic, especially God's logic, can sometimes be terrifying. And when they broke those jars on that hilltop and they blasted those trumpets, I have to wonder what was going through the minds of those men. Just as I understand what was going through my mind when God says, go to Ames and buy a house. Like, no, God, we can't afford that. Don't you understand logic? Don't you understand finances? God, so I understand it quite well. I also understand faith and trust. If I trust in myself, I will in fact fail. If Gideon had decided that sending out the rest of his army home, if he'd have kept the entire 33,000 men and attacked the Midianites, the 100,000 man army down below would have just annihilated them. Had we said, look at the money, Lord, we're staying in Owl Falls until the money shows up, Wings of Refuge would have been a ministry that died 8 years ago for the lack of funds, because we were unwilling to do it with God's work. Now, I am here to tell you, trusting God is terrifying. It's definitely not boring. And there are going to be times in your life where God takes you to that point and says, here you are. You can either trust in me or you can trust in yourself. And I don't care how smart you are, how strong you are. If I put my trust in myself over my trust in my God, I will fail. If I trust my God more than I trust me, I will succeed. It is difficult and scary to trust God. Make no mistake. Stepping out in faith when you see that the logic says absolutely no way. It's hard. Speaking from experience, I can tell you it's hard. But I'm also going to tell you, speaking from experience, you will be blown away. To sit back and watch God do what only God can do. When he can take a ministry that was going bankrupt and buy 2 new homes in Ames and literally man them, staff them, and now some 7 years later we have staff that we never even dreamed we could have. And like I say, we have a budget that scares the living daylights out of me because it's God's budget, not mine. Get ready. If you're going to trust God, get ready. You're going to do a lot of wow. If you watch God do it instead of yourself, believe me, you're going to see the most exciting times of your life. You're going to watch God do things that humanly people will say, no, that will not work. That cannot work. That makes no sense. And I'm here to tell you, doing what God calls you to do frequently does mean making no sense. If I'm in an army, I don't send all but 300 men home to fight a 100,000 man army. That makes no sense. And yet, God wanted to make sure that when it was all said and done, nobody standing on that hill goes, look what I just did. Not a single man holding a torch or a trumpet walked away from that hill that night thinking, wow, I just did something. They all humbly came back and says, look what God did for us this night. Without question. When I share to you about Wings of Refuge, it's not about how great our word of Wings of Refuge is. And we've got some pretty great people on there. But I'm here to tell you, it was not our decisions. It was not our policies that created it. It was because we trusted God more than we trusted ourselves. We trusted God more than we trusted the logic. And in doing so, we watched an army disappear. We see a thriving ministry that unfortunately is all too necessary in this world. I saw Polk County, Florida, just had an arrest of human trafficking. I believe they had over 100 arrests for just human trafficking. Many of the people they arrested were illegal aliens being forced into trafficking. That's still here. The need is still here. We have a bigger need today than we did 9 years or 10 years ago when we started. So is God going to continue to bless that ministry? I'm going to tell you, as long as that board of directors and that staff put God's trust ahead of their own, yes, it will. Can God defeat the army that you are facing right now? Yes, He can. But you're going to have to turn it over to Him and trust that He can do it. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to do nothing. Those 300 men had to go up on a hill. Wings of Refuge had to go into Ames and find a house. And then when another house was available, we had to say yes. We could have turned them down. Had we would have ceased to exist, I fear. Had those men under Gideon refused to go up on that hill that night, the Midianites would still have been taking over Israel. Your decision as to whether you trust God more than yourself is going to be the determining factor as to whether God can deliver you. Now, that doesn't mean He won't ask you to do something. But make no mistake, frequently when God delivers you, it will be in a situation like this where if I try to take credit for what happened, I'm going to end up looking very foolish. Gideon was no way going to claim how great he was, albeit the people of Israel thought pretty highly of him. They wanted to make him king right there and then. And Gideon says, no, it wasn't me, it was God. My friends, it is scary to trust God. But wow, if you do, hang on. You're going to see some miraculous things. Thank you.